2 billion shillings annual budget. In his budget speech yesterday, Nairobi Finance and Economic Planning Executive Charles Kerich announced new taxes and levies that, if approved by the country or the county assembly, will see city residents dig deeper into their pockets starting next month. This story is tucked away on page 4 of the Business Daily this morning. Also, flower sales to Australia at risk under new rules. Kenya is staring, I should say, at a possible loss of the multi-billion shilling Australian flower market after the country passed new stringent rules that could lock out exports to the country. The new set of rules, to be effected on September the 1st, require the all horticultural. It continues on page 4 of the Business Daily, so I cannot just flip over there because of interest of time to give you all the gritty details or to actually finish that particular statement. But grab a copy of the Business Daily this morning for this particular story as well. Let's move on and to see what also is on the front page of Taifa Leo. But before we go there, we can actually look on the ticket there. Safaricom takes SIM fraud war to mobile banking. Safaricom has launched an anti-fraud intelligence solution to alert financial sector players on fraudulent mobile banking transactions involving SIM card swaps and newly registered lines. This story continues on page 7 of the Business Daily today. Today's digit is 10.5 billion shillings. That is the amount the Treasury allocated to state-backed projects in the next financial year. You have his story continuing on page 20 of the Business Daily this morning. Also, state calls for cheap housing contractors. Construction and building material suppliers have been invited to bid in the multi-billion shilling affordable housing scheme set for national rollout. And this story continues on page 20 of the Business Daily this morning. We continue also to cross the border and see what is on the front page of the Citizen. And this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Citizen. If you are in Rwanda, not in Rwanda, but this is in Tanzania. Rwanda is the New Times. Giant LPG facility set to cut charcoal use is a story that you want to follow. It says the 150 billion shillings investment is expected to increase gas production for supply in both urban and rural areas where high charcoal use contributes to rapid deforestation and environmental degradation. This story continues on page 2 of the Citizen this morning. Also, President John Magufuli tours Taifa Gas Tanzania Limited's 150 billion shillings in liquefied petroleum gas storage. This is a related picture there. And filling facility after its commissioning in Dar es Salaam yesterday. Dr. Magufuli can be seen here flanked by Energy Minister, that is Medad Kalemani, and Taifa Gas Board Chairman Rostam Aziz. All that tucked away also on page 2 of the Citizen this morning. Parliament passes budget after ministers put up spirited defense is another story that you want to follow inside the Daily. That is the Citizen in Tanzania this morning. Isle House unhappy with China loan delays is another story. You can follow that on page 2. Lawmakers in Zanzibar have raised concerns over delays by the union government to approve a Chinese loan earmarked for 3 major development projects in the Isles. You can follow the story on page 3 of the Citizen this morning. Still in Tanzania, we have Mwananchi as well. And this is your splash today on the front page of Mwananchi. This is the Swahili version of the Citizen in Tanzania. Rostam, John Pombe Magufuli amenirudisha. That is what we have as a splash. Asema misimamo yake dhidi ya matendo ya zamani ya ujanja katika biashara na uwezekaji na ukepaji kodi ndivyo vimemrejesha. That is a story that you want to follow on page 2 of the Mwananchi in Tanzania, and you can see that particular picture that was also on the front page of the Citizen as well. Here, the story is all tucked away. I should say not on page 2, but page 4 of the Citizen in Tanzania. We cross over now to Rwanda and look at what is on the front page of the New Times in Rwanda. And this is what you're waking up to this morning. Rwanda outlines plan to increase energy demand. That is what we have as a splash this morning there. And you can follow that story also on page 5. It says the government is seeking to drive up demand for energy in the country to match generation capacity. Currently, Rwanda generates 221 megawatts, and it targets 512 megawatts by 2024. That is what is on the front page of the New Times. If you're waking up in Rwanda this morning, grab a copy of that. And of course, you can see there is also a standalone picture there. Investment. COK pitches opportunities to business communities or community. And this is just an aerial view of New Look KBC. That is Kigali Heights, Kigali Convention Center, and Radisson Blue Hotel in Kamihurura. Officials at the City Hall yesterday pitched investment opportunities in Kigali to the business community. You can follow the story inside the New Times as well. China's Exim Bank to finance Rwanda's private sector is another story that you need to doggedly follow this morning inside the business, not the business daily, but the New Times in Rwanda. And finally, I want just to show you what we do have as well inside the editorial cartoons before we go to our interview this morning. And this is what we have inside the Standard today, according to Gado. Another lazy serial liar, a joke, a dishonest buffoon, a cavorting charlatan from a privileged and posh upbringing who has consistently racially abused women and minorities is about to be elected to high office. And of course, you can see this is Donald Trump, and this is Boris Johnson, who is touted to be the next prime minister after the exit of Theresa May, according to the polls currently. And this is what has been captured aptly today by Gado inside the Standard. Let's see what we have also inside the Daily Nation and the People Daily. And this is what we have inside the People Daily. No, yes, this is all about the house allowance that we have the row between the SRC and MPs right now. And according to Stano, maybe we need a Solomonic sort of intervention from CJ Maraga. I'll leave it for you to decipher that. That is what we have inside the People Daily, according to Stano today. So there you go. You have your dailies, but I'll be remiss if I don't show you also what lastly we do have internationally on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Italy to host 2026 Winter Games in 2 northern venues is what we have on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. That is the standalone picture you can see there. And Google Force plan for federal probe. Also, US hits Iranian officials with new sanctions is another story that you want to follow also as a sidebar there on the front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning. So make sure you grab a copy of the Daily Nation, a copy of the Business Daily, Taifa Leo, whichever paper that really floats your boat this morning for these compelling, riveting stories. But for now, we want to buckle down to a discussion today. As I've mentioned to you earlier, I had told you that today is International Day in support of victims of torture. And we know torture and other forms of violence continue to increase in Kenya. We're given to understand that every year, more than 5,000 persons continue to be victims of torture, and more than 10,000 are affected directly or indirectly. This situation will recur year upon year unless the government takes concrete steps to eradicate torture by acting at its economic, social, and cultural root cause. Torture seeks to annihilate the victim's personality and denies the inherent dignity of the human being. Despite the absolute prohibition of torture under international law, torture persists in all regions of the world. Concerns about protecting national security and borders are increasingly used to allow torture and other forms of cruel, degrading, and inhumane treatment. Its pervasive consequences often go beyond the isolated act on an individual and can be transmitted through generations and lead to cycles of violence. The United Nations has condemned torture from the outset as one of the vilest acts perpetrated by human beings on their fellow human beings. Torture is a crime under international law. According to all relevant instruments, it is absolutely prohibited and cannot be justified under any circumstances. This prohibition forms part of customary international law, which means that it is binding on every member of the international community, regardless of whether a state has ratified international treaties in which torture is expressly prohibited. And we want just to cross over now to the other side of the studio, where we have our guests this morning to take us through this particular discussion this morning, and we hear from them what is currently happening as far as this day is concerned, and what milestones we've made as a country in regard to, of course, preventing torture or combating torture and supporting torture victims here in the country as well. Some of the harrowing torture that they normally go through also will be accounted also this morning, or will be given a snippet and an in-depth understanding from our panelists this morning who will tell us more about this. Right, I'll just go and cross over to them to just give us that a bit of introduction this morning, a big day when it comes to support, of course, and looking at the victims and how they've suffered, not just worldwide, but especially here in the country. And of course, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself from the far left, to just tell us who you are and, of course, how this particular day is pivotal to you.
Yes, thank you, Debarl.
Welcome. Morning. Good morning to you.
My name is Steve Sinter. I'm an advocate, and I also partner with several human rights organizations with regard to issues of human rights. And in this particular instance, we partner with the Independent Medical Legal Unit, who play a very pivotal role in addressing issues of torture, both in prevention and also in coming up with mitigating efforts after the act has occurred.
Right. All right. Let's hear from also.
Good morning. My name is Hilda.
Hilda.
I work at the Independent Medical Legal Unit as the program officer in charge of psychological rehabilitation. And as an institution, ours is just an issue of supporting victims of torture, violence, and discrimination, and ensuring that they get holistic support and holistic services, but also looking at the issue of reform, the reforms agenda, working very closely with the National Police Service. And this year, today marks a very special day. The June 26th is a special day in the calendar of human rights organizations and civil society that work around the issue of safeguarding human rights and specifically torture. And our theme this year is looking at the psychological impact of torture for both victims as well as family members. We see anywhere between 200 to 300 victims of torture together with their families. And these are people who have either required some form of legal support, psychological support, and or medical support. And we have a very unique approach where we work with various professionals, so medical doctors, human rights monitors, journalists, trauma counselors, lawyers such as Wakili Steve Sinter to provide these services to victims and families. And this year we are marking the celebrations in Kisumu, and we are today in the morning we are going to be doing a tree planting session at Kondele Police Station. So we're glad to be here and to share a bit more information about what we do as an institution, but also the kind of work that we do in supporting victims of torture. So thanks for having us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And lastly, let's hear also from Daktari. Good morning.
Good morning to you. I'm Violet Ndiga. I'm a counseling psychologist, a trauma counselor. I'm in private practice, but I've been working with IMLU for a long time, in support of the victims of torture and other atrocities. So we are here today just to share the psychological impact of torture and how people present with the various issues.
Thank you. Right, so there you have it. Of course, we'll be hearing from them this morning. There's Stephen, that is Stevie Sinter, also Hilda Nyatete, and Dr. Violet Nthiga. And also we welcome your views as well. Remember to cross over to our Twitter handle, which is AM Live TV, AM Live TV, our profile name on Facebook, and 20686, our SMS portal. So far, let's just begin with you, Hilda. According to IMLU, this day is very special to you. And of course, you have a commemorative tree that you'll be planting in Kisumu. Are you telling me from here you're flying over to Kisumu or, but it is very special to IMLU. We can just begin from there.
Right.
Why is it so special?
I think, of course, it's very special because of the work that we do as an institution. Our vision is to look at the issue of torture and eradication of torture, violence and discrimination. Like I said, over the years, we've been in existence for about 25 years now, and we've seen over 5,000 victims of torture. And the June 26th day in the calendar is a special one, like I said earlier, because I think in 1997, the UN General Assembly recognized torture as one of the most degrading and heinous acts that
Yes.
human beings can, do to each other. And so recognize that we need to stand in support of victims of torture and their families, and to commemorate this day in a special way with thematic focuses every year. And we are in Kisumu this morning. We are not going to be flying to Kisumu, unfortunately, but we have our team members
In
who
Kisumu
are
already?
in Kisumu, yes,
Okay.
in Kondele. We've actually been there this whole week. And Kisumu is special for us because we've seen over the last 5 years or so a very rough experience with citizens and the police, a lot of violence, and especially around the general elections. And the narrative out there is that police and communities are like oil and water. And we figured it's important that we begin to change this narrative, and picked Kisumu especially just because of what is out there. The numbers speak for themselves. And one of the things that we have begun doing is that we are looking at some of the grievances and some of the issues that community members have been exposed to. And we've set up initiatives such as litigation of cases of torture. Well, from 2007 and 2017 post-election cases of deaths, people who've gone through violence, and I think the nation witnessed Baby Pendo's death, and so on and so forth. But beyond litigation, of course, the direct support of medical support and psychological support, but also looking at the angle of reforms. Every 4 years, we conduct a national torture prevalence survey. And historically, we have not had a very good relationship with police officers. Reason being, they always tend to come up as the #1 perpetrators at around 60%. And ours has been a very combative relationship with the National Police Service, where we say, pointing fingers and saying you're perpetrating these heinous acts, and therefore we cannot speak the same language. But then we realized that in order for us to address the issue of torture, really, we have to look at not just the response angle, but also at the prevention angle. And therefore, then this meant that we needed to look very critically at the issue of police reforms, which we are very glad to be a part of, specifically around working with the police reform working group, which brings together various civil society organizations and the National Police Service to look at 4 critical areas around citizen participation, quality service, police welfare, and accountability. And so Kisumu then becomes our baby in terms of how then does this become alive. And so outside of the services that we have provided, we are also helping to establish the structures of police, community policing, and especially in 2 police stations. And that is why today we are doing a tree planting exercise at the Kondele police station. We did a football match yesterday that brought together police officers and community members. We did a street cleaning exercise, and of course later on we are going to do a legal aid forum to just address the cases that we have registered from 2007 and 2017.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let us cross over now to Steve, just to also give us a perspective of the legal aspect of it.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier, and I know in this country we've been trying for the longest time ever to maybe get legislative, instruments as far as torture is concerned, and one of it is the Prevention of Torture
Yes.
bill. That took a long, protracted time. I don't know if it has been. It is an act right now, or it's still a bill. Just forgive my deficiency on that. You can try and educate me. I've lost track of it because, yes, it's taken the longest ever time. But I appreciate what also Himlo has been doing in trying to push the envelope to make sure that at least this has been ascended to by the president to become an act. But you can take us through the journey so far and the challenges so far as that particular piece of legal instrument is concerned.
Yes. First of all, just historically, a bit of history. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights
Yes.
that was passed in 1949 was very clear that it stated that the act of torture is unacceptable in human society. And then, of course, the UN again went a step further in 1984 through the Convention Against Torture, which now, that's where it becomes tricky for Kenya, if I bring Kenya in, because it took a long time for the state to ratify that convention to become applicable in Kenya as a law. Because as much as we say that these laws that we call customary in nature, customary international law, not all of them are necessarily embraced in domestic situations.
Yes.
But then for Kenya, just in response to your question about the bill, yes, it's now an act.
It's now
the
an act.
Prevention of Torture Act was passed in 2017.
Yes.
And it's actually a very useful piece of legislation in continuing the conversation. And I say continuing because, like Hilda's rightly pointed out, offenses are still being committed. It seems like as a country, especially among the state agencies, security agencies, it's like we had normalized torture.
Yes.
And it has become very fashionable. It had become very fashionable, let me say hard, because I also have to admit that incidences have reduced, but we are not where we should be. So we had normalized it by justifying and saying, for example, or this person had information that was very critical, and there was the only one way to get it out of him was in this manner. And therefore, even society had gotten into a sort of a lull that it was normal. You would wonder why police would not use, for example, police would not use violence or intimidation on an individual. Both could be physical and emotional violence, whereby a suspect is being told that if you do not do this, you're not going to have it easy on you. And some would even apply actual physical harm. So for me, the laws are there now. I would not say that the laws are not there. And like Hilda also pointed out, that the Police Working Reforms Group came up with the successes, including the National Police Service Act, which is very, very clear. It even directs a police officer not to take unlawful commands. Because one of the issues you realize, and I think most of us in studio know, is most of the time the excuse given by police officers is that they were told by their bosses that you need to do this. This is how you'll extract this confession.
Yes.
However, for me, I find those to be excuses because back in 2013, there was an amendment to our criminal laws, the Criminal Laws Amendment Act of 2013, which came in to outlaw confessions that are not given before a magistrate. And so nowadays, that's why you don't hear about a confession was given before police. Previously, it has to be before. Even right now, a court can, in certain circumstances, allow a confession given before a chief inspector. But there will be more scrutiny on such information because the court would like to establish, was there coercion, was there intimidation, and such kind of things. So we have made progress. We've made progress in terms of legislation. However, it seems like we still have a hangover of what we used to do as a country, because it's like even the citizenry had normalized corruption. Just as we normalized corruption by saying, it's in our minds. Corruption has also been normalized because we justify by saying, yes, it is normalized nowadays. Because if you speak to the next person, you're told, if I got a chance, I'm only complaining because you're complaining because you don't have a chance. Yes. But if I got a chance, I will just do the necessary. Yeah, so for me, the legislation is there now. We have ratified the convention, the relevant protocols under international law. We have passed the Prevention of Torture Act. We have even in other instruments of law in Kenya, including the National Police Service, which outlaw torture. So we do not have excuses. It's more of the relevant bodies. The question we should be asking next is who has the responsibility to implement these laws?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And of course, we shall be delving deeper also on the definition of torture itself, which has been a ticklish issue, and how that particular legal instrument also will clarify that. Yes. But let's invite Dr. Thiga now to tell us more about, of course, the psychological aspect of this, because we're looking at it holistically, and I like the approach that it comes from IMLU. It is not just a legal aspect, but the whole 360 approach that you're bringing to the victims of torture, or the issue of torture. And this particular, of course, year, your theme is running under, of course, psychological impact of torture on victims and their families. This is where Dr. Thiga comes in and to tell us, of course, sometimes it is not just about the victim himself, it's about the family, the ripple effect that really comes from that. Aside from him really going through the harrowing torture of being, subjected to, such kind of treatment which are very inhumane, and given to understand what Hilda is telling us, perpetrated especially by police and some of the security agencies, these victims come to you and you've seen the impact, the magnitude, of how devastated they are. Just give us a snippet of what Kenyans don't really know about victims of torture and their families.
Yeah, victims of torture and their families go through a lot of strain, and particularly members of the family, because sometimes the victims, their mental capacity has been distorted and so on. Sometimes they are not aware of even what's happening to them. But then the members of the family, on the other hand, may also reject them because some of the atrocities accorded to them are so heinous, that other members imagine, this person may have played his way into whatever happened to him and so on. Or other members of the family, like spouses, also want to just get rid of the partner. I'm looking at a situation where, like in the recent post-election violence, where people were raped, others were beaten up, others sodomized and so on, and you'll find a spouse throwing away the wife and children. On the other hand, the wife would do the same when the man has also been injured, forgetting
so in
that
this case, it's the man who's been injured and is throwing away the wife and the children.
the wife has been raped, the man throws him away. The man has been sodomized, injured, or a lot of things happened to him. The wife also is either running away or claiming that, he played his way into the hands of the police and so on. So basically what happens through psychological support, we try to understand the interpretation of the victim, what exactly happened to him, how does he appraise the situation, how is he affected. So we work with what he has on hand. And many of the psychological effects of torture, many of them hallucinate. They have confused, they have lost their jobs, they have lost their livelihood, and they feel they are worthless and hopeless. Many of them are also suicidal. So we try to bring back some hope in their life, like what really matters to you. What was your life like? We also go back even to their childhood experiences, because a lot of this also has to do with community, with family of origin, and with what dreams, aspirations this guy had in life. So when all those are thwarted, of course, then one feels he's hopeless and he would rather kill himself. But he forgets he has a family that he loves, because at that particular moment, it is what he's ailing from that matters. But through psychological support, we are able to bring them back together, and we explore some of the issues and help them to minimize the pain. Now, when it comes to the families, naturally, they are also devastated, and many of them, most of the time, it is the husband who was the breadwinner. So they are left without anything, and they are also devastated, but nobody cares about them, because they are imagining it's only this person who was injured. So we also try to bring in the spouses, if they are available, including the children and so on. Now, a lot of these may not happen as quickly as anybody may imagine, because when they go for medical attention, after they have been seen by the legal department and so on, the scars are healed, but the psychological issues remain with them. They have intrusive images, they hallucinate. Some of them develop sexual dysfunctions, and some of them become suicidal, or the excess anger turns into violence, and they can also kill, because now they don't care. This happened to me or happened to some significant others. Why can't I do the same? So we try to let them understand that even the people who did this, like the lawyer has just mentioned, some of them are doing it under duress. Like, you must use force to extract information from somebody. Yeah, and that's why, in fact, as Hilda mentioned, we have also brought police on board and other law enforcement officers, because they also need support. Some of them are not acting because out of their willpower, but it is because of the nature of their training, the nature of their lifestyle, and what they believe should happen. Sometimes they are also scared of what could happen to them.
So this is sort of a vicarious trauma, you know, in the context of your work. Also, unconsciously, you tend to be, you know, recording all these things in your memory, and somehow it comes to play at some point, affecting you, maybe subjecting you to depression, and you do not know why this is happening, but it is because of the nature of your job.
Yes, and first of all, we attend to the secondary victims because of that vicarious trauma. On our part, we also have our own support groups.
Thank you.
Where
Thank
we
you.
go for psychological clinics.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so on.
Right, just to hold on to that, we go over to Hilda. Because also, from your recent survey, at least you mentioned that 30% of Kenyans are subjected, you know, to torture. And that's a huge, you know, slice of the population that we're talking about here in the country. But we want to see what are some of the instigating factors leading to torture, because it seems also when you look at this population that we're talking about, the 30%, there are people who they're actually maybe living under, you know, $1 poverty line, according to economic status that we're talking about in the country, and they're hugely from the informal sector. People who are subjected to poverty. So are we saying that torture is actually, you know, a mainstay, so to speak, of people who are poor? Because first of all, they're denied justice, and maybe even access to justice is not really denied, but access to justice is not possible because first of all, of the financial implications on this. And so these are the people who mostly are subjected. But from your own survey, maybe you can give us an inside scoop of how poverty and torture, they correlate.
Right. Of course, like you said, a 30% prevalence of torture is a big chunk of the population. And one of the things that came about from the survey, out of the people who had been subjected, chose not to report, either because they thought, I don't think anything is going to be done, and I also don't want to report the same police officer with whom I live, perhaps in the same region. And so poverty has a huge angling to how victims or the community relates with police officers or with the perpetrators. Let me just speak of perpetrators and not necessarily narrowing down onto police officers. We have a huge chunk of that populace being the youth, who are either unemployed, at home doing mostly nothing, who have a higher tendency of, you know, having run-ins with the law enforcement agencies, and so that's some of the factors that tends to draw out the issue of torture with the community members, and having them not being able to report because one, they don't think anything will be done, or two, that they don't know where to report these cases or when these instances do happen. So there's a huge correlation between those who are poor, because then that speaks to the resources. And I know Wakili spoke about corruption, and really that is one of the things that does tend to happen, that there's an angling about whether I have the resources to get myself out of trouble, and whether I do not. And if I do not have the resources to get myself out of trouble, say for instance, if I've had a run-in with the police officers, then I might find myself in trouble. And we've seen so many cases in especially urban slums where we have had rogue officers who are, you know, dealing in a very ruthless manner with the youth in some of the urban slum areas that we have seen. And also just having communities, like Wakili said, normalizing torture. Because if you're a troublemaker in the community, then, you know, let the police deal with you as they deem fit. So that is one of the things that I think we have seen in terms of who the victims are and how their relationship is with the perpetrators. I don't want to say that those who are affluent in society perhaps may not go through torture, but just from our statistics in the surveys that we have done, yes, the bigger population of the victims or those who are victimized tends to be those who are, lesser in society in terms of, having resources and things available to them in that respect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say from Steve, I don't know, has as I mentioned earlier, has this particular act, that is the Prevention of Torture Act, brought any clarity as far as definition of torture is concerned?
Yes, indeed. What the Act has done, it has actually picked the definition from the Convention. And essentially what it defines torture as, to paraphrase, because it's a very long definition, it's basically an act in which physical or mental suffering is inflicted on a person on the basis of three intentions. The first one is to extract information. And I would like to point out that the Convention did not bring these three circumstances by accident. It's because of an evaluation of circumstances historically on why torture is committed. So the first one would be to extract information. The second bit is to inflict a form of punishment because someone is. So there's an aspect of punishment. Someone is suspected of having committed an offense.
Yes.
Therefore, you're torturing them as a form of punishment, which is extrajudicial in nature, of course. And thirdly is as a way of this person who's inflicting the torture discriminating against this person for some reason.
Yes.
So the torture comes as a byproduct of a prejudice. Like if you feel, for example, an example like I can give you is when there's a time there was a roundup of members of the Somali community. During the time when there was this roundup because of suspected terrorism links and all that, and people were headed into centers at Kasarani area, and that in itself was torture on the basis of discrimination. So those are the three instances in which the Act picked the definition from the Convention and brought out those three aspects as well. Yeah.
Thank you. But I wanted also to maybe probe deeper, and because I know in Kenya we're still struggling when it comes to the criminal code, which does not contain any specific provisions against domestic violence. Because I think also forms of torture that is not held just perpetrated by police, but even from our family setup, things like, and Dr. also think I can attest to this as well. We have, husbands who are torturing their women, the children as well. And there is a lacuna as far as, provisions is concerned in our legal system as far as this is it goes. Police normally do not also investigate cases of domestic violence because they generally regard this as a private family affair. Hiyo ni mambo ya nyumbani, ni mambo ya mume na mke, watuwezi ingilia.
Yes.
Maybe you can clarify on this and how
yes.
also you'll clarify on that. But Hila, you can tell us. Also, are you broadening your scope as far as also looking at these issues is concerned? Because also that is another form of torture that maybe as an organization need to explore more, especially in the family setup.
Right. Okay. I think from our, we expanded our vision, and previously we looked at just torture alone. But then the face of torture keeps changing.
It keeps changing, right.
And we also registered quite a number of cases of, say, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, and things like that, and issues of even discrimination and violence. And so now our scope looks at violence, torture, and discrimination.
Violence, torture, and discrimination.
Yes. However, because for lack of a better phrase, we don't want to be the savior of humanity, but we are working with the various organizations. We have a brilliant referral mechanism and referral system. We would love to address cases of domestic violence. However, we have partners who are addressing cases of domestic violence when it comes to, say, just intimate partner violence. But the widening of our scope then was to address the changing face of torture in as far as, who the perpetrator is. and the perpetrator here, or the other side of the bridge for us would be state actors. So, and state actors can be anywhere from, you know, the security sector to government agencies and so on and so forth. However, that does not mean that then if somebody reports a case of domestic violence to the independent medical legal unit, that then we would not provide these services. We can provide these services, and we do work with an amazing group of partner organizations whose mandate is specific on issues of intimate partner violence, or, you know, child abuse and cases of land issues and things like that. The beauty about working in the human rights sector is again, no one is working in isolation, and human rights are far and wide, and we cannot say that if you're not a victim of torture, then we have no business with you. Then we are not really looking at the bigger picture in that respect. And so I think it's important that a multi-sectoral approach is implemented in as far as addressing cases of human rights violation. And human rights violations, of course, go beyond torture. You've talked about domestic violence. There are people who are handling issues of a female genital cut and so on and so forth. It's a wide range. We can go on and on and on. But we do provide services, direct services that speak to issues of torture, violence, and discrimination in as far as state and the state agencies are concerned. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Nthige, maybe you can actually take us through, because I'd hoped also we will have the time to go through, you know, the forms of torture that are there, so that maybe people can get a wider understanding on that. I don't know if this is really right up your alley, or maybe it's is maybe the priest of pathologies or criminologists to tell us this. But Dr. Nthige, you can just give us some forms of torture that, of course, aside from psychological and, you know, that bodily harm, that direct bodily harm, you can take us through if this is truly within your remit, and your understanding on that.
Well, it is. We serve the same clients.
Okay.
So the forms of torture are many. Like when we talk of police cells, of course, there is coercion. There is that sexual assault, both sodomy and rape. There is beatings, unwarranted beatings, locked up in wet cells, poured on water. And sometimes they are also forced to stay together, both sexes, male and female. And of course, a lot of things happen there. Some of them are also perpetrated by the officers. And we also have burns and acid corrosions.
Acid corrosions as well.
Yeah, thrown to them and so on. And some of them are also forced to stay in the cell with the mad people in an asylum or something like that, which is still a form of torture. Yeah, so they are enormous. There are actually very many. And of course, the vicarious trauma to the family as this is happening, they are not aware of where their significant others are. And you may imagine also a mother. Let's look at an expectant mother whose husband has gone through excessive torture. With all that generalized anxiety, the mother is experiencing the same. This goes down and also affects the fetus. So you find in future, if that child also comes across that kind of situation, then the child is affected more because it triggers the vicarious trauma that was not addressed since nobody knew about it.
So this can be actually picked even by...
Yeah, intergenerational.
Intergenerationally. Oh, that is very extensive. Yeah, but let's hear from also Steve. When I talked about now the domestic violence beat and we don't have it also maybe in our criminal code, how we can address it. I don't know. We've had also pieces of legislations recently as far as Marriage Act is concerned. Maybe you can actually bring me up to speed and our viewers on this as well. Has that been somewhat been made a bit limpid right now?
Well, yes, I do appreciate what you say in terms of lacuna. However, torture by its definition, and like Hilda rightly pointed out, the expectation, not just in Kenya, even from the international statutes, is that the state actors would be more accountable on the same. Because by its nature, torture has an element of control. That there's somebody has probably been detained or is about to be detained. And then now, because of that element of control, you would expect more of the state to be the ones to be accountable on elements of torture. In response to your issue of domestic violence, well, we have the laws. The penal code is there. In fact, by its very nature, before the passing of the Prevention of Torture Act, one of the things the previous Attorney General used to justify it was the slow pace in which they were thinking about it and considering, in quotes, considering whether to, as if it's a favor they were going to do Kenyans, was that we already had laws, which was the penal code, which talks about assault, battery, of course, assault causing grievous bodily harm, which had sanctions. Now, those are the excuses they used to use. However, the trick was that in some legislation, including the Kenya Police Act, as it then was, there was, and the National Defense Forces Act, as it then was as well, because they were also repealed and improved after the 2010 Constitution. There used to be no accountability on other agencies. And it's especially, for example, the Kenya Wildlife Service and the Kenya Forest Service, who by their very nature, they interact a lot with individuals in their work. And you find maybe somebody has been found in a forest, allegedly illegally harvesting some trees, indigenous species. Then you find they interact with the Kenya Forest Service officers, and somehow the torture comes in. Also the same Kenya Wildlife, I'm sure you're aware, the issues of poachers being arrested, being killed, and all those kind of things. So domestic violence, what I would simply say is we can elevate in terms of the laws. We can maybe bring in, not necessarily bring in a new law, improve our laws so that the sanctions are more dire so as to act as a deterrent. But in terms of torture, it will be very tricky because we'll be expanding the scope, and at the end of the day, the philosophy behind the conventions may be lost, because now we'll be bringing things that are essentially domestic offenses, and domestic, I use the word domestic loosely, to be bringing them now in an ambit where it becomes very complicated. Because remember, I remember after you've undergone torture, the Constitution gives you the option or the right to seek for compensation from the state. But of course, this is a very lengthy conversation that 1 hour or so may not be sufficient.
I know. Yeah, and of course, on that note, we want to take a short break. When we circle back, we'll be winding up with you. Because also, I think added up now to the new bills is also the Veterans Bill. And I don't know also how IMLU, because you're saying you're always broadening you, and of course your scope as well, from violence, torture. You can also tell us, the victims who are coming out from the war, we are still having boots on the ground in Somali. There are people who also undergo torture. You know, maybe some of them, the soldiers are captured, prisoners of war, and they're coming back home. How do we also try to make them also integrated back to the society, and they're still suffering from this? Just very briefly, then we'll wind up on that particular note. We're going to take a short break right now. When we circle back, of course, we shall be hearing from them on that Veterans Bill, on how they can also maybe add in on that as well, just to give us a snippet of what is happening. That is still also in the public. People are also participating on that. So we want also to discuss that a little bit. Then we'll, of course, be winding up the show on this particular important day where we're observing the International Day in support of victims of torture in the world. So we take a short break. When we circle back, we continue with the one. Don't worry. International Day in support of victims of torture, which is being observed worldwide. And we are holding court this morning with panelists who are heavily involved in, of course, issues to do with torture. We have Hilda Nyatete, who is a program officer in charge of psychological support at Independent Medical Legal Unit. Also, Dr. Violet Nthiga, counseling psychologist with IMLU Network of Counselors, and also the proprietor of Eden Therapy, and Steve Isinta, senior human rights lawyer and a member of the IMLU Network of Lawyers. Before we took a break, we had promised you to discuss the issues to do with veterans. Right now, also in the country, we have the Veterans Bill, which is being discussed. And we want to know, how does this also widen the scope of people who are involved, of course, in war? The soldiers, we have military on the ground in Somalia right now, some of them subjected to the rigors of war. When they come back, I know also that is a huge work for THIGA to try and integrate them into society, because they are damaged, not only maybe physically, maybe they could be made from war, but psychologically as well. But Hilda, tell us from also your perspective as IMLU, is this also another avenue maybe that you need to pursue?
Well, I was just sharing with Wakili here that I think our work is cut out for us, because now we are just getting into working with police, and especially on the issue of police welfare, specifically around psychological support for and not just the National Police Service. Really, let me just speak about the security sector. And for us, I think it's becoming increasingly important to understand and appreciate where the security sector is coming from, in terms of, are we able to tell the victim story of the police officer who then becomes a perpetrator? Do we understand, does the community understand, what this officer has gone through? And I think I'd love to really just acknowledge the IG, who is very interested and very keen on the issue of psychological support and services for officers across the country, and he has engaged quite a number of us in civil society and in the human rights sector in providing this support. And so I think, well, we might get into working with the veterans, who knows, but for now I think working with the police officers and being able to provide this support and these services, one, in terms of capacity building and training, looking at the issues of how does it work when an officer comes straight from training, is deployed in a war-torn area at the border, and is expected to come back and report on duty, and is transferred, and issues such as this that affect really their psychological well-being, that then we tend to look at them as machines, and we don't understand that they go through things. They're human beings. They bleed when we cut, and so I think it's important that we understand first and foremost that these are human beings, whether they are veterans, whether we're dealing with the military or with the police officers, and understanding their victim story and being able to provide mechanisms and just support that will enable them to function optimally and not perpetuate this cycle of violence that we see that keeps happening, that then we have gotten to a point that even citizens have normalized this. I think in future we might get into it. I'll have to be honest, I've heard of it today, and I'm already getting excited about it, because I think that the security sector is so wide. We've only started working with the National Police Service in as far as the issue of welfare and psychological support, and I think that is where our colleagues such as Dr. Violet, and we have a huge network in our organization that I think we can engage in providing the support.
Let's say from Steve as well on this, because that is a big or a huge chunk of also of psychosocial support that they need, and I think that is very instrumental when it comes to also helping the security sector as far as victims of torture are concerned.
Yes, true. The Military Veterans Act bill, sorry, it's still a bill, was funny enough. It came out in 2013. That is when it was
In
brought to
2013?
Parliament. Yes, it
Okay.
is a bill of 2013, and it simply shows as a country how we handle legislation. Unfortunately, that even the Prevention of Torture Act that was when it was a bill. It was a bill when IMLU were very active about it and took it through Parliament. It was in 2010, and then it's 7 years later that it became an act. Now, for the military veterans bill, it was prompted, in my belief, that by our sojourn into Somalia, and then now soldiers were coming back. They're not doing well. They were being ignored. Some of them, as she was saying, they would come from those surgeons and come, either they're being deployed somewhere else immediately, maybe the UN peacekeeping missions. And to me, that was it's quite a concern. So this is a bill more of a reaction of something that's happened. It's not a deliberate thing that as a country we feel like we look at our soldiers and we feel they need assistance here and there. But anyway, away from the criticism, the bill is actually quite progressive because, among other things, it provides for compensation, provides for training of these soldiers, especially because by their definition, these are soldiers who have left the service. It provides for compensation, for skills training, psychological support, for such, and that was, can you imagine, to something that has been lacking. Even as we speak, it's not there. We're still talking of it as something we intend to do. So it is quite progressive, but my concern, Debarl, will be mainly on the definition of a veteran. Quickly, I'll tell you that they define a veteran as either of these following people. Somebody who served in the King's African Rifles before 1963. Somebody who served in the Kenya Defence Forces after 1963. Somebody who served in the Kenya Defence Forces up to and finished their term and was honorably discharged. Now, my concern is it seems to leave out a chunk of people who Hilda and Violet may, in their own professional opinion, decide or give an opinion that they're not able to continue with the service. So there's a gap there. Would you be told as a military officer that, oh, you are no longer fit mentally to be, and it's not of your own making, it's because of your work. So it's a conversation. This bill, I believe, all people of good interest, or people who are interested in the good sense, in a good sense, and they want the best for our military, we should interrogate the bill and we should contribute and also challenge the media. We should, I think, isolate it and deal with it just on its basis. Call a parliamentarian here or a committee, the defense committee, to tell us how far have they gone with it and what are the highlights, how have they heard from Kenyans, what have Kenyans talked about in terms of the bill.
Right, finally, let's hear from also Dr. Violet, because I think also you have your work cut out. If this really comes into law, of course, there are so many issues that need to also, bells and whistles maybe need to be added and some to be rectified as well. These people, and I know also from the police force, there is that aspect of psychosocial support, because for the longest time they've been neglected. People who are handling, dead bodies, some of the things that they're subjected to can be quite traumatizing. But from your own perspective then, how do you think also, because you're working in liaison with IMBLU, that you can come into play also in helping the police force and the security, maybe even on this veterans bill as well, to give your input, because I think it's still open for discussion. Briefly.
We are actually doing that, and for the longest time, from the time I became a counseling psychologist, I always complained, why do we always blame police? We need to find out what motivates them to do some of those acts. And as mentioned briefly, partly it is their training, partly the exposure to very traumatic sites, and nobody cares about it. They are not debriefed. The family members also are not aware of the type of work this policeman or policewoman is going to encounter, their remuneration and many other things. So basically what we do, we debrief them and we try to highlight the fact that those victims are also human beings like them, but we appreciate that they are going through a lot of psychological trauma. So we try and help them ventilate the issues they have with them in a confidential situation. So many of them actually own up and they appreciate it's the way they have been socialized within the service that makes them behave like that. I want to look at situations like even the natural disasters, the Sinai fire and so on. People are dying, there is oil there and fire. it's the policeman chased to go and ensure that those people are rescued. And nobody cares about this policeman. So he actually comes back with a person, fragmented body, or the whole skin has been thrown off. And this policeman, he said, put that one down, go to another section, and so on. So these people suffer a lot of delusions of grandeur and so on. They become psychotic because they are human beings. Yeah. So we try and help them ventilate those issues, appreciate they are human beings, but also for them to understand even that perpetrator or the victim they are supporting, who may be a criminal actually, is a human being. They need to wait until that criminal at least goes through the arm of law.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Let's leave it at that. Hilda Nyatete, Program Officer in charge of Psychological Support at IMLU. We really appreciate your input this morning, and of course also observing this day which is being held in Kisumu. We want to thank you so much. Also Dr. Violet Nthiga, counseling psychologist with the IMLU network of counselors and also proprietor of Eden Therapy. Thank you for coming through. And Steve Incenta, senior human rights lawyer and a member of IMLU network of lawyers. We thank you for coming through this day, and of course also making sure that at least we understand what torture is all about. It's a broad discussion that we cannot exhaustively just finish here, but I want to also, Hila, just to remind the viewers, what is the theme running this particular day? What is it running under? What is the theme?
So our theme today is on highlighting the psychological impact of torture for victims and their families. And to remind anyone who is in Kisumu to go to the Kondele police station. We are doing a tree planting session and bridging the gap between community and police and restoring confidence and trust.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we wind up with Samuel Oruto, who's saying, in one way or another, at least everybody at one point in life has experienced torture of a certain form, from psychological to physical, rising need to see torture in a broader way to provide assistance up to including families who are suffering in silence. He still goes on to say that torture is a common problem in many families, society and government. Beside torture, only considered to be done by the government through security operators, when the worst torture being psychological, mostly in marriages and in children by parents and adults. Thank you for your contribution, Samuel Ruto, there on social media. And yes, let's see what is happening in Kisumu in observing this International Day in support of victims of torture. Torture is barbaric, torture is inhumane, and we need to actually obliterate it from our public lexicon. Thank you very much for your valid company. We continue with the Standing on Guard. We'll be joined also later by, of course, our panelists to continue to look at what is happening as far as security is concerned in the region, in the country, and of course also in the world. We are keeping an eye on the enemy here on Standing on Guard. Don't go away. Right now, I just want to also just move on and continue with international news, and just to give you a brief of what is happening in Ethiopia and of course the US and Iran tensions as well. Now, Ethiopia held a memorial for the Army Chief of Staff slain over the weekend, along with 4 other senior officials, as part of what authorities describe as a foiled plot to seize control of Amhara region. Hundreds of soldiers and officers in uniform gathered for the ceremony in a large hall in central Addis Ababa. The coffins of Army Chief of Staff, that is Siare Mekonnen, and a retired general, both shot dead on Saturday by Siare's bodyguard in the national capital Addis Ababa, were carried into the hall, draped in Ethiopian flags. Photographs of the men in formal military dress were adorned with yellow roses. Siare will be buried in his home region of Amhara today. Saturday's violence unfolded in 2 separate attacks. They were led by Amhara's head of state, Security General Asamnei Sige, who had been openly recruiting fighters for ethnic militia in a state that has become a flashpoint for violence. Asem New was shot on Monday near Amhara's capital, Bahir Dar. The Prime Minister's press secretary told Reuters the killings are the biggest challenge yet to the sweeping political and economic reforms that the 42-year-old Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed kick-started after he took power in the Horn of Africa country in April 2018. And Chinese President Xi Jinping and visiting Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni agreed to lift their country's relationship to a comprehensive cooperative partnership on Tuesday. At present, China-Uganda ties are at their best in history as the political mutual trust has been continuously enhanced. Pragmatic cooperation has yielded fruitful results, and the two sides maintain close collaboration in international and regional affairs. Xi Jinping said this. He said China was willing to work with Uganda to promote the ties in the process of a joint building of the Belt and Road and the implementation of the outcome of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, Beijing Summit. Also, he said that Uganda should continue to understand and support each other on issues related to each other's core interests and major concerns. He continued to say China is willing to strengthen exchanges with Uganda on the experience of governance and deepen cooperation in areas such as infrastructure, construction, trade, energy, agriculture, epidemic prevention and control, human resources, industrial parks and tourism. Chinese enterprises are encouraged to invest in Uganda in accordance with market-oriented principles. The Chinese side appreciated the positive role played by Uganda in maintaining regional peace and stability and supports Uganda's efforts to safeguard its own security. Uganda will take the establishment of comprehensive cooperative partnership as an opportunity to deepen cooperation with China, according to Museveni, expressing the willingness to learn from the Communist Party of China's experience in state governance. Museveni added that unilateralism was very dangerous and that Uganda and China should strengthen communication and coordination in multilateral affairs such as those within the framework of the United Nations. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has predicted that Washington's pressure campaign against Iran will lead it to enter negotiations. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing sanctions on Monday against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior figures. The moves came after Iran shot down a U.S. drone last week and Trump called off a retaliatory airstrike minutes before impact, which would have been the first time the United States had bombed Iran in decades of hostility between them. In Jerusalem, Bolton also said that it will be a mistake for the Palestinians to boycott the first economic stage of Trump's administration Middle East plan, which kicks off in Bahrain's capital, Manama, on Tuesday.
Or, as the president said, I think very cogently yesterday morning, in imposing sanctions on the supreme leader, we will simply enhance the maximum pressure campaign further. It will be, I think, the combination of sanctions and other pressure that does bring Iran to the table. Look, Iran has engaged over the past couple months in a long series of unprovoked and unjustifiable attacks on oil tankers, oil pipelines, shooting down an American drone, and engaging in a whole range of other activity that's unacceptable. In that kind of environment, threatening the conference in Bahrain is always a possibility. They're close geographic proximity. It would be a big mistake for Iran to continue this kind of behavior. So we hope the conference, which extends over several days, will proceed unimpeded, and that would be best from even Iran's own point of view. Rather than relitigate decades of disputes, think about the future and negotiate on that basis. So we'll see how it goes. I think we're optimistic. I think the president's optimistic. And I hope the Palestinians are optimistic too.
And of course, we shall be exploring that and, of course, what is happening in Ethiopia and looking briefly also on the Kenya-Somalia border dispute that is still escalating and taking now a different dimension as well. Will we as a country be a landlocked country if this particular dispute continues? That is another probing question that people are asking right now. But we want to hear from our expert this morning. Let's just begin, first of all, with what is happening in Ethiopia, because that is bound to also affect our security as well, because people are holding Ethiopia as the figure of stability, especially in the Horn of Africa, as it is right now. Now, if it goes out of kilter right now with these suicide attempts, not just suicide, but the coup attempt as well, what will happen, or what does it portend for the security of our nation as well? And I want to introduce our panelists this morning. We are joined by Erastus Mwencha, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha. He is the chair of, he's a former deputy chair of the African Union. And also we are joined by Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a conflict and resolution expert and also a national security commentator. And also we are joined by Peter Kagwanja, who is the CEO of African Policy Institute as well, to just give us a raft of understanding of issues that we'll be discussing here, to give us a confluence, or maybe to just try and conflate them together so that we can get a better understanding on what is happening regionally so far. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Debarl.
Right, let's just begin first of all with what is happening with Kenya and Somalia, of course, row, and what does it portend? Because now information that we have is this, that we are facing a situation where the country can be landlocked because of this particular dispute that now is ongoing. We are still at the International Court of Justice as well. So let's just hear, first of all, from your understanding, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha. Are we likely to face this situation if it goes on?
Well, I wouldn't be that pessimistic, but of course it's a very serious situation. And as you know, that the International Court of Justice has now set a date for hearing, 13th of September.
13th of September?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And if that be the case, then the court in its own wisdom will find a way of, making sure that these countries, there is either win-win, or if there is a dispute is escalated, then it's going to drag out for a long time to come. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether there will be any need of any diplomatic moves now that the court has come in. CS Monica Chuma was meeting Parliament the other day, and of course she made a presentation in camera. So we don't know what that comes out with. But to me, I can see that yes, this matter is now gone out of, as I would say, the genie is out of the bottle. Mm-hmm. We have to manage the crisis. And managing the crisis may mean, and I think that was a right move that Parliament and the CS took, that let's not talk too much, let's not escalate the matter, let's the due process then go ahead. If we are able then to convince Somalia that we take the matter out of the court, mm-hmm. because to me, that is where we should have been. Mm-hmm. This is not a matter that should be settled in the court, because the court, there will be a loser and a winner. But if it's out, normally mediation is a better option. Mm-hmm. And let's hope that Somalia will accept that option. I hope this is the trend, this is a line that we're going to take in the meantime.
All right. Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Debarl, if because is Kenya going to be landlocked? Will Kenya have a shoreline? Yes, it will still continue to have a shoreline if ICJ gives that maritime waters to Somalia. Will that affect Kenya's maritime ownership and the entry of ships into the ports of Mombasa and Lamu without any problem? That is where the problem is, that if ICJ is going to award that waters to Somalia, then on the outer limits of the continental shelf, that is 350 nautical miles, then you see that that line that is coming down, and the one that is from Somalia, that Somalia claims, and the one that starts from down in Shimoni going on a straight line with Tanzania, they meet actually somewhere around 300 nautical miles of the continental shelf. This means that any ship that is coming to dock in the port of Mombasa and Lamu, if ICJ is going to award Somalia that territory, that ship will need to seek permission from, or will need to inform Somalia or Tanzania that they are coming into the country. So in that respect, yes, and that's where it complicates maritime trade for Kenya. Kenya will still have the shoreline, the 12 nautical miles, the 200 miles EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, except that I think 24-25% of that will be taken. But on the outer limits, the continental shelf, then that's where the problem is going to be for Kenya. And I guess, and this is what we have consistently been saying, that this problem can be resolved bilaterally between Kenya and Somalia, and we encourage the two countries to negotiate, and we also encourage Somalia to take this case out of ICJ.
All right, so let's hear from Peter Kagwanja on this. The issue has been on the equidistant and also the parallel principle. That is the biggest now two options that we do have so far. How will these two sort of approaches maybe impact Kenya negatively or positively?
The first problem we have here, and why this issue has become such a sensational issue and aroused a lot of emotions, is because there is little trust, particularly from the African side, not Kenya alone, on international justice system, because it's literally a civilizational question. And now the equidistant principle, where lines or rather imaginary lines across waters are supposed to run 35 degrees from the mainland, has been applied widely in the Caspian Sea. And if you don't apply that rule in the Caspian Sea, then many countries will not have an outlet to the Mediterranean, finally to the wide open sea. So for other countries, run like that so that you can get an outlet into the sea. So it's a question of justice for Europe. Now, what is funny is the application of the same equidistant principle in the open sea of the Indian Ocean. And what is also intriguing is the emphasis on this equidistance in a region where all lines negotiated so far, negotiated not through the court, ran parallel east. So if you look at the border between South Africa and Mozambique, it runs parallel east. The border between Tanzania and Mozambique, it runs parallel east. And there are also negotiations within that country so that certain territories that are traditionally within the domains of certain countries are respected. Now, our negotiation with Tanzania has taken into account Pemba and Zanzibar, so that because even if we insist on parallel east, as it is now, we'll get a chunk of Pemba, which is part of Zanzibar. If now Somalia insists on the equidistance, the principle internationally is that that principle will have to apply on all the boundaries in the Indian Ocean. So what the court will be doing if it rules in favor of that is open a Pandora's box of multiple, what we call domino effects of conflicts, because Kenya then, in order to have the open sea, would require to insist on this principle in regard to Tanzania. What does that mean? We get the whole island of Pemba, from what I have done, and a portion of Zanzibar before we get to the 350 nautical miles into the sea. That means we retain our continental shelf and we retain our open shelf. But where does that leave us with our relationship with Tanzania,
Yes,
which is good so far?
That's the question.
Then Mozambique, you'll have to insist on that. I mean, Tanzania then may not want to deal with Kenya and insist on the same on Mozambique. And then we are all going, Doctor, that way. The final country that will say no to this will be South Africa.
So we're actually seeing
so the
A
court,
long drawn out.
yeah,
the
domino effect.
Yeah, the domino effect of that ruling, whatever is done, is going to be major. And it is no longer about Kenya alone. Kenya is insisting on a principle, but it's also insisting on something else. Negotiations so that we look at the peculiarities of our own boundaries, which the court may not have a universal principle to apply. So really, it's not a dispute between Kenya and Somalia in that sense.
In the sense.
It is a conflict of principles that need to be resolved and can better be resolved by negotiation between the two countries, not through the courts.
Not through the courts.
Because if
negotiation is actually the way to go.
Because the court is going to use what we call in legal terms the precedents. And the only precedents we have with this, what we're calling equidistance principle, is the Caspian Sea. And I have explained why these lines have to go that way, because the entrance to the sea, which kinds of open landlocked countries into the open seas, will itself, have to go that way in order to allow countries have access. Yeah, because if you insist on parallel east or parallel west, then it means a number of countries are not going to have anything other than big swimming pools outside their what is called the shoreline is an extended swimming pool.
So we have a problem when it comes now to the issue of, for that matter, being on the horn of a dilemma, when it comes to issues of integration. Now we have a spirit of EAC that we're trying to integrate. We have, a common parliament amongst us. But now we can see, whichever way that this will go, and you say the avenue of the court is not the best way, let's negotiate. But if now Somalia insists that, yes, we want to use the courts, because we've argued here before, and we've said, that even the president of that particular court is from Somalia. So even maybe this particular judgment might be skewed towards Somalia. But in the spirit of integration right now, when we're talking about the East African community and the African Continental Free Trade Area as well, what is this portending for us as, a community?
Debarl, I think from what has been explained, the best route for Somalia, or even Kenya, and for that matter, even Africa as a whole, is that this matter is negotiated outside the court. In fact, the protocol, the UN Charter itself, did not envision that this matter be in the domain of the court itself. If you look at the spirit of that charter, it was envisioning a mediation kind of process. Because the court process is adversarial, that when we go there, we'll be going there as like enemies. So it's not going to help these countries. Somalia would be well advised, and Kenya is taking that route too, that let's take this matter out and talk about it in a more civil manner, because it has high emotions. For Somalia now, the stakes would be there, and the leadership would be looking back at the population, would be pushing them to say, you can't cede our land to Kenya. The same matter, the same way Kenya, and you can see the cascade. So the best way out is to bring this matter out. And I think this is a matter, that's what we said earlier on. Diplomacy now must be applied in all levels, using the two countries direct or other means, so that they can get out and talk to each other.
All right.
Yeah, but here is why really they must bring this case home to be negotiated. First of all, the AU principles. For a very long time, they've always asked African states to use existing channels within the continent to actually deal with these issues. Now, many gas and oil experts have said and are predicting that area that you see there, that's the final. That's perhaps the final frontier or the final discoveries of major oil reserves globally are actually found there.
Major oil reserves
The
globally.
final discoveries are just there. Not the shaded line that is in dispute. I mean, that's part of it. So that whole region, from down Lamu all the way to Berbera,
Yeah.
and perhaps keeping a little bit, then going down to
Maputo.
Sungu, southern parts of Tanzania to Beira,
Yeah,
all the way down. So these are the final frontiers of major oil discoveries. Now, what does that mean? It means that the big boys are not going to allow African countries to actually touch this oil. We are talking some of the European countries that have been at this for a very long time, some of the countries in the Middle East that will think that if there is more oil here than there, then they must somehow make sure that this oil doesn't come, is not drilled, because it's going to also affect prices. And it means that these are the areas that is going to be, if the resources are going to be used well, will be far much more developed. But obviously, major oil companies in the world, which are Western, have a big eye on this. And this is why we said right from the beginning, this is an issue that it's not just an issue for Kenya and Somalia. I think African countries have got to take this very seriously so that we bring these issues home and discuss. Otherwise, major instability is on the way if we just allow external actors to interfere.
And are we facing maybe this particular agitation that we are in right now? Do you think in any way, from your own assessment, is being instigated by some of these external, actors as well? That someone is pushing the envelope through Somalia to make sure that we have this sort of dispute, escalating between Kenya and Somalia, that their foreign interest as it is?
I think the main issue here is who want Kenya and Somalia to have differences, and what are the reasons for that, and why would they get out of their way to finance Somalia's case in whatever. As you know, Somalia is just recovering from long wars, and we really appreciate what is happening in Mogadishu in terms of the economic gains that are being made, what the president and the prime minister in that country are doing to bring back Somalia into the economic fold. But that said, Somalia cannot by itself afford such a protracted case like this one, which has gone on since 2014 and gone through 3 presidents. In a country which doesn't even have the historical memory in terms of the bureaucracy and the systems, and the systematic way that some of the things are being done. If you look at the depositions, what was deposited in these courts, Somalia posted over 5 volumes, each at 250 pages. Kenya only posted 1 volume of whatever case with 1,175 pages. I need to check my record. But it's 1 volume, which is smaller than 1 single volume of the Somali in the case. And when you read through, as I have done, through these volumes and see the articulation, even the language used can tell you where the lawyers are coming from. Even the language, because it's so queenly, it's so clear that you can know where they're coming from. Obviously, intelligence sources will tell you that it's true. Just try to read. They're on the ICJ website. It is not like it's something that is.
But we have learned Somalians who are in the diaspora as well. So maybe they can. Most of them were speaking the Queen's English.
No, not really. You understand. We went to the ICC and you saw the articulations, and we had the Queen's lawyers, whatever they're called. We know what. In scholarship, language speaks volume, because an Australian writing a document and a Canadian writing and a British, there are worlds of differences, you can tell. Anyway, the payment of this is traced from the Middle East, a country. The country paying for the keys is traced from the Middle East, no names. Now, so as Dr. Mustafa rightly put it, they are geopolitical interests. And as early as 2004, it was published in the Journal of Foreign Affairs that the lands adjacent to the Rift Valley, where the Rift Valley cuts even across the Red Sea, coming through Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique, are going to be the largest frontier of oil discoveries in the world.
Oh, really?
And are going
Yes,
to have the largest, the largest. In fact, the author of the article argued that the problem is not the oil, is whether the region has the governance capacity to manage that kind of wealth. That was the question that was raised. And he gave statistics, including the wealth that is going to accrue to the region by 2015, because he was writing 2004, 2005. Now, I shared that concern at that time. And I think what we are now seeing here is the incapacity of Somali government, the incapacity of the Kenyan government, or the Kenyan elite and the Somali elite, to know that first and foremost, they are Africans who need to manage their wealth. That wealth, if it is tapped whether by Kenya or by Somalia, is going to benefit the African people of the East Coast, particularly between the Ruvuma, Tanzania, and Beira, you know, that kind of area. So I think that's why the whole question of negotiation becomes so important, because we're going to have so many other things happening in this ocean, given this frontier. The Middle East people are concerned that we are going now to overturn the global oil hegemons, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, the Bahrainians and all. Because the argument, and I have no scientific proof for this, you can check, no scientific proof at all, is that much of this oil, because of the slanting of the ground under the waters, is going to flow into this region. There is that fear.
Flowing into our region?
Into our region.
From Somalia?
No, not from Somalia. It's from the Middle East.
From the Middle East?
Yes. And as a result, you see also the sea has valleys and hills and so on under the sea. The flow, the lay of the land under the sea is such that there is fear. Just like between Nigeria and Chad, there is the fear that the oil from Nigeria is flowing into, and the explanation is given about the
Iraq and Kuwait.
Iraq and Kuwait. The war between Iraq and Kuwait was the fact that the Iraqi oil was flowing into the Kuwait wells. So you can see, these are scientific arguments or speculations based now on seismic surveys. But when we come to the ground, we don't know how that is going. So there are serious power questions regarding to the control of oil. Remember, Saudi Arabia and the Middle East powers, together with their Western European partners, are controlling the oil industry globally. Now, if this region discovers, that is exploit the oil as now discovered in the entire of the region as explained, all the way from the top, the Cape of Guandafui, all the way up to the lower parts of Mozambique. Oil and gas, if it's exploited, then we are seeing a region that will be the wealthiest in the world.
Wealthiest in the world. But also there has been a controversy on the viability of the oil that is coming, especially from our region. Even the Turkana oil, people are questioning the commercial viability of it, that it doesn't meet the threshold, the standard threshold as far as international standards are concerned. I don't know. Maybe, Mustafa, you can also weigh in on this.
Well, no, I saw that we going to be putting out 70,000 barrels a day. You know, compare that to what Saudi Arabia is putting out, 11 million barrels per day, and therefore, and that the fact that Talo Oil has spent over 200 billion Kenya shillings and will spend another 300 billion Kenya shillings. There are calculations there that I don't really understand, Debarl, but what is important here is what Professor Kagonja is explaining, and to put confirmed statistics to that, to have that in a whole picture, is oil in Saudi Arabia is going to run out in 52 years.
Yeah.
Oil in Qatar is going to in fact it's decreasing. It's the gas that is you know the reserve that is going to last about 84 years, but oil is going to take less time. In the UAE, in 65 years there'll be no more if they continue pump out, and if there are no new reserves to be discovered in 65 years, there'll be no more oil to actually pump out. In Oman, the oil has already come down. In Bahrain has reached its peak already. That's why it diversified into financial institutions. Bahrain will be a net importer of oil in about 15 years' time. So this is a resource that is going to be finished, and there are new frontiers of oil. And perhaps maybe this is what is causing the problem, because these are new frontiers of oil discoveries that will last. We don't know how long they're going to last. Turkana is a little bit off. Maybe they need to do more work. I'm not sure. Turkana is in the Rift Valley.
That's inland. That is offshore.
That's right. But it's the offshore.
That's where the focus is.
It's the offshore, right from the Guadafui down to Beira. That's where all eyes are on.
So we explore a bit as also, because I see, for the interest of time, we won't even have time to discuss Ethiopia a bit. So let's just drill deeper with this, and then we can pick up on Ethiopia also next week, because I think that will be it is a developing story as it is right now. But let's say from Erasmus Mwencha briefly, when we see this geopolitics and we see Sparmajo, many people saying that he is actually allied to the United States, and the other factions of Somali government allied to the Middle East as well. Are we seeing a government that they have vested interest from without, and the key stabilizing figure also is leaning towards one part? What does it portend then for in terms of when you're talking about negotiations? Because if we come to the negotiating table and we know what fortunes is about to befall us, we're bound to have a lose-lose sort of a situation, not a win-win. Or if it's a win-win, how do you then split? I don't know. I'm not an expert on the negotiations, but now you can tell us what are we facing in terms of geopolitics and the negotiations bit.
Yeah, well, I think what Mustafa and Peter have said, if you look at the geopolitics of Somalia and Kenya and the Horn of Africa as a whole, there is very clear interest, particularly from the Middle East, which have always complicated. We know that even in our neighborhood, the role that Saudi Arabia and the others have been playing, and all these big players from the Middle East, is increasingly becoming quite phenomenal. And so you cannot just write it out. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, there is also the Western interests in the region, which, as you can see, even the crisis that is in the Middle East is partly related to resources. Right now, the intention of Americans to tame Iran is under the guise that, okay, we want to safeguard that passage, the Gulf of what?
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, Hormuz, so that international trade can take place. And what are you talking about? It's oil. The countries that are importing so that they can pass. So the oil, economics of oil is still big because we have not found alternative sources of energy that can replace it, although it's a wasting asset and people know. So when you see a region that is going to become a major source of this commodity, obviously you cannot rule out those that will destabilize that. So your second question was, if you go to negotiations, who are you going to be talking to? I think what Peter was alluding to, if you see a dog that is behaving in a certain manner, or if you see a behavior, you have to check who's the owner, who's going to be behind all this. And so we need now to go behind and say, who is behind all this? And those are the people, perhaps then we want to check what are their motives. And I will not rule out the fact that if they see this region is positioning itself to be quite a powerful, and you can see there is tension, they know that China may be coming in, Russia would be coming in. So make it ungovernable, make it difficult for anything to happen so that we stay put. It's not that they didn't know that this oil was here all this time. They know it, and I'm sure they can see it. But why have we not exploited it? Because they wanted to make sure that they would be the ones to come and position themselves to be able to be the ones to exploit it.
Right, right. Well, we're just about to wind up. Maybe Peter Kagwanja, can you give us your final remarks as we're winding up?
Two issues. One is what Honorable Mwenja has just put here on the table, that the owner of the dog in the Middle East is essentially the multinational giants. And therefore, you cannot ignore, and the multinational giants, oil giants, are in cahoots with certain powers in the Middle East. And that is no longer theoretical. You can look at it that way. The third actor who have, the second issue is, of course, the role of the Arab League. It was very, very intriguing to see the Arab Parliament commenting on this matter and leaning very closely on the side of Somalia, which, I mean, the land itself, if we are talking about Muslims, the land we are talking about is in the hands of Kenyan Muslims. So these are Kenyan Muslims. So you are disinheriting one Muslim in favor of another. What logic is that, if that is the line to go? So the issue is neither Muslim versus Christian, because this is what they are trying to bring into issue. It's Muslim versus Muslim in terms of the territory. And therefore, we need to be a little bit careful. But my conclusion simply is, the court has no business in this case. The Somali and the Kenyan elite must sit. They must activate diplomacy. Whatever the court would want to decide, whatever the ruling would come from the court, ultimately, the China-Philippine case is the one that we're going to determine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mustafa, also your headline thoughts.
In 1953, the government of Iran, a democratically elected government led by Mohammad Mossadegh, was deposed by agents from the West because he nationalized oil in Iran, and they had to get him out. There have been regime changes in the Middle East, including in Iraq, because of oil. The West is not going to sleep. They will interfere with this issue of the oil blocks, and it's up to the African countries to stand up to the West and whoever else is trying to interfere with the exploration and drilling of oil.
Ambassador Erastus.
Well, I think it's all said. What it will mean is that Kenya now in the diplomatic channels may have to use all available means, strict bilateral, use African Union, use all other friends, and even go to Middle East and start talking to those countries for the need to avoid this escalation, because as you see, this thing is bigger than the two countries, it's global, and if we don't manage it, we'll be in a war, in a long drawn-out crisis that will affect both countries, and as you rightly mentioned, it will be a lose-lose situation.
It should be a lose-lose situation. Thank you very much, Professor Peter Kagwanja, the CEO of African Policy Institute, also Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a conflict and resolution and national security commentator. Thank you for coming through this morning, and also the chairman of African Capacity Building Foundation, and also the former deputy chair of African Union. This is Ambassador Erastus Mwencha. Thank you for coming through. This is a developing story. We'll pick up on it next week to see how far does it go. Also, I liked what Peter Kagwanja said. Let's activate diplomacy, right? The courts have no space in this particular issue, but we need to negotiate. It's the only way that we're going to come out of this morass. So we'll be keeping our eyes peeled on this, and of course, keeping out our ear to hear what will be happening on the ground as well. Thank you for your valued company this morning. Also, I appreciate your comments on Twitter. We're running out of time. I can't be able to read some of them this morning, but nonetheless, I really do appreciate you driving the show with me. Living with Us is up next.